Hello sports fans, welcome to Super Sports Central. Today, we're going to be going over my NFL free agency predictions. So I've come up with a list of about 15 players who are going to be free agents, and we're going to predict where I think they'll end up signing. But the first player on the list is Mike Evans, and he's an interesting one. Now he's getting older as he's 32, and he'll be 33 with the start of next season, but he's still a good player, and even though he didn't hit 1,000 yards this past year, that was because he got hurt, and I still think he can be a very valuable receiver to a team's offense. Now as far as where he goes, I could really see him going in a few different directions, and I don't think returning to Tampa is a guarantee. Now, I think the Bills were a pretty realistic landing spot before they traded for DJ Moore. I've heard the Broncos get thrown around a little bit, although I don't really think that makes a ton of sense because Courtland Sutton's a pretty similar receiver. So, in the end, I do think he will go back to Tampa, but I don't think that's a guarantee. Moving on to Trey Hendrickson. So he's a player a lot like Mike Evans. Getting a little bit older, as I believe he's 30 or 31, but he's a player who got limited by injuries this past year, but can still play at a very high level. In fact, Trey Hendrickson had 17.5 sacks each of the last 2 years, not including this past year when he got hurt. But he's still a really good player. I think he could go a bunch of places. I think he could go to a couple NFC East teams in the Cowboys or Commanders. But I think Trey Hendrickson ends up going to the Colts, another team in need of a pass rusher. He is one of the better pass rushers in the NFL, and he would also reunite with former defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo. Up next, we got Ravens center Tyler Linderbaum. So Linderbaum, I think he's one of the better free agents available, and I would say he's definitely top 3. And he's going to end up getting paid a ton of money, and he'll probably be the highest paid center when he eventually signs his contract. But there is a lot of different places I think Tyler Linderbaum can go, and he's going to help any team's offensive line because he's one of the better centers in the NFL. Now, I think he could go back to Baltimore and stay with the Ravens. I think the Raiders are also a realistic possibility, and he could go to the Giants, and he's been linked to the Giants. Now, as a Giants fan, I would love to see Tyler Linderbaum sign there, especially because he's got the John Harbaugh connection, so it makes a lot of sense for the Giants to bring him in. But I also don't know if we did enough to clear enough cap space, because the Giants aren't exactly a team right now with a ton of money, and they really didn't do as much as I thought they would do when it comes to cutting players and restructuring contracts. So I don't think the Giants really have the money to sign Linderbaum, and for that reason, I'm going to say he goes to the Raiders. They've got a lot of money, they've got a big need along the entire offensive line, and I think he goes to the Raiders. It makes a lot of sense for both sides, and I've got Tyler Linderbaum going to Las Vegas. Up next, we got linebacker Devin Lloyd. So Devin Lloyd is a player entering free agency at the right time, and he's coming off a great year. He was a second-team All-Pro after he had 81 tackles, a sack and a half, 7 passes defended, and 5 interceptions. But he's been a very good player, still on the younger side as well, just 25 or 26 years old, and he can go to several different teams. I think the Cowboys make a lot of sense with their need for a linebacker. The Giants also need a linebacker, but as I just said, they don't have a ton of cap space. And I definitely also think there's a chance he goes to the Raiders. I think the Titans are a possibility, and he could go back to the Jaguars. But I think Devin Lloyd is another player going to go to the Raiders. They've got a lot of cap space, they got some big needs all over their team, and I think it makes a lot of sense for both sides. Similar to Tyler Linderbaum, he can go anchor that defense, and Devin Lloyd goes to the Raiders. Moving on to Kyler Murray. So he's an interesting one, because the Cardinals, they're going to cut him, and he hasn't been that great, and he only played 5 games this past year before he got hurt, and missed the rest of the year. But he's still got talent, got a lot of potential, and because of that, there's going to be a lot of teams interested in him. Especially because he's only going to get signed for $1.3 million, which is the league minimum, because the Cardinals are still paying him all that money after they cut him. But I think Kyler can go to a bunch of different teams, but I really think this comes down to the Vikings and the Jets. Both teams want to bring in a quarterback for different reasons. For the Jets, that's likely to start. For the Vikings, it could be to start, but definitely just to give J.J. McCarthy some kind of competition. But I think Kyler Murray goes to the Jets. If you guys saw my video where I predicted the starting quarterback for every team next season, you guys know I predicted Kyler Murray to go to the Jets, and that's what I think ends up happening. Moving on, we've got Odafe Oweh. So he's a guy a lot like Devin Lloyd, on the younger side, but entering free agency at the right time after a pretty good season. And Odafe Oweh, he's really started to break out over the past couple seasons. In 2024 with the Ravens, he had 10.5 sacks, and then this past year, after he got traded to the Chargers, in 13 games he had 10 sacks, and that includes a playoff game where he got 3 of them. But Odafe Oweh, he's consistently gotten better, and because of that, I think he's going to get quite a bit of money in free agency. Now, I think he could go back to the Chargers, although they already signed Khalil Mack, so I don't know if they want to be paying 2 edge rushers a pretty decent amount of money. I think the Commanders are also a realistic option, but an underrated spot I like for Odafe Oweh is the Titans. They're a younger team. Odafe Oweh is a pretty young player. He's on the rise, and I think he kind of fits their timeline as well. So I think Odafe Oweh goes to the Titans as a little bit of an underrated landing spot. Moving on, we've got another edge rusher, and that is Jaelan Phillips. So Jaelan Phillips, he's one of the better free agents available. And he definitely didn't have his best year this past year with only 5 sacks, but he still got consistent pressure, and he was still a pretty productive edge rusher, even though the sack numbers weren't too crazy. Now, as far as where he goes, I think he goes back to Philly and re-signs with the Eagles. They gave him a 3rd round pick to get him at the deadline. I don't really think they want to lose him, and he's also pretty good for them, even though the sack numbers weren't too crazy. So I think Jalen Phillips goes back to the Eagles. Moving on to Alec Pierce. So he's an interesting one, because he's a good player, but he's almost strictly a deep threat. And this past year, he had over 1,000 yards. He had 1,003 yards, but on just 47 catches. But he's a great deep threat, and he's led the NFL in yards per catch each of the past 2 seasons. Now, he's in an interesting spot because he's got such a specific role. Now, it's going to be interesting to see who really tries to go out and get him, but he will probably get paid a lot of money. But I think the most realistic spot for Alec Pierce is the Patriots. They're in desperate need of a receiver after releasing Stephon Diggs. They've got the money to be able to pay him, and I think Alec Pierce goes to New England to play for the Patriots. Up next, we've got Wan'Dale Robinson, another wide receiver. So Wan'Dale Robinson is like the exact opposite of Alec Pierce. Pierce a bigger downfield guy, Robinson a smaller slot guy who relies on a ton of targets as well. As this past year, Wan'Dale Robinson is actually top 10 in targets with 140, and he only averaged 11 yards per catch. But he's still a really good player, and I would like to see the Giants bring him back, because they desperately need a wide receiver too if they don't bring him back, but I just don't think that ends up happening. Now, what I do think happens is Wan'Dale Robinson goes to Tennessee and plays for the Titans to reunite with Brian Daboll. I think that makes a lot of sense. He knows the system. The Titans need a receiver for Cam Ward to throw to, and they've got a lot of cap space. So I think that's the perfect situation for Wan'Dale Robinson, and he goes to the Titans. Moving on, we've got offensive lineman Elijah Vera Tucker. So he did not play this past year because he tore his triceps in the preseason and missed the entire season. But despite that, he still have a lot of interest, and he's a very solid player. Now, he can go to a bunch of different places. I think he could go back to the Jets, he could stay in New York and play for the Giants, he could also go to the Raiders, who obviously need help along the offensive line, and I think the Titans reuniting with Robert Saleh is a possibility as well. But I think the Giants end up signing Elijah Vera Tucker. I think they miss out on Tyler Linderbaum, but they're able to get Elijah Vera Tucker, and he won't even have to move at all, and he'll stay playing in New York, although technically New Jersey. Up next, we've got the Super Bowl MVP, Kenneth Walker. So he's in a weird situation because he's a free agent right after winning Super Bowl MVP. And he could become just the 4th player in NFL history to leave in free agency right after winning Super Bowl MVP. Now, I think Kenneth Walker can go a few different places. I think going back to the Seahawks makes a lot of sense, and I think the Seahawks should want to re-sign him, especially because Zach Charbonnet tore his ACL in the playoffs, and he'll miss most next season. But I also just don't know how interested the Seahawks are in bringing him back. Now, a couple teams I do think are interested are the Chiefs and the Broncos. Both can definitely use a running back, and I think he ends up signing with the Broncos, because the run game definitely took a step back after J.K. Dobbins got hurt. I like R.J. Harvey, although I definitely think pairing him with Kenneth Walker would be a great duo, and I think the Broncos go out and sign Kenneth Walker. Moving on, we've got Packer linebacker Quay Walker. So he's a very solid player, still fairly young, just 25 years old, and I definitely think he'll have a lot of interest. Now, a place I don't think will go is the Packers, because they just traded for Zaire Franklin from the Colts. So to me that indicates they're not going to bring back Quay Walker, and Zaire Franklin is the replacement for him. But as far as where he does go, I think that's the Cowboys. I think they miss out on Devin Lloyd, they're able to get Quay Walker, and he goes and helps that terrible defense in Dallas. Up next, we got Packer left tackle and another player named Walker in Rasheed Walker. So he's a player a lot like his teammate Quay Walker. A very solid player, not necessarily the greatest player at their respective position, but a very solid player, and he should help whatever team he goes to. Now, as far as what team he goes to, I'm not really too sure. I've seen some rumors maybe the Browns, because they need like an entire new offensive line. So I'll say them, although I'm not too confident in that prediction. Although, to be fair, I'm not really that confident in any of these predictions. Just my best guess. And our final player where I'll be predicting where they'll go is actually the 3rd straight Packer on the list. It is Malik Willis. So he's an interesting one, because he's a player who's probably going to have a lot of interest, because he showed a lot of potential this past year filling in for Jordan Love, as he had 5 touchdowns and 0 turnovers when he was the Packers quarterback. Now, we haven't really seen him start for an extended period of time really at all in the NFL, and he still has a lot of potential, and I think he could have success in the right situation. Now, because he's got a lot of potential, I definitely think we're going to see a lot of teams have interest. I think the Jets are a possibility, the Steelers, Cardinals, Browns, Dolphins. I think there's a lot of different teams who are going to be interested in Malik Willis. But Malik Willis, much like Kyler Murray, if you guys saw my video where I predicted starting quarterback for every team, I predicted him to go to the Dolphins. He's already got connections with the GM and head coach there, both being from the Packers. So I think Malik Willis is the Dolphins starting quarterback next season, and he goes to the Dolphins in free agency. But those are my NFL free agency predictions. If there was a guy that wasn't on this list that you want to know where he's going to end up going, or where I think he'll end up going, just comment in the comments and I'll let you guys know my prediction. But thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn notifications. I do my best to post as often as possible, and I will see you in the next video.